Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Nietzsche podcast. Today I have a guest. I'm here with John Hunt, and he's an author and also a fan of Friedrich Nietzsche, as we all are. John, how you doing? Welcome to the podcast.
I'm great. Thanks.
Would you tell everyone your background and how you got interested in Nietzsche? It's always the first question.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Interesting. So I've always, from teenage years, I've always like read a lot. Like I read a bit of everything. But like I heard of Nietzsche, oddly enough. Like you always see his quotes of him at the beginning of certain movies, especially the
Right.
Abyss one, right? You hear that all the time, and or you read that one all the time. So I got interested in him when I was a teenager. Then, like I understood some of it, and it was very compelling to me. Made me think a lot. Um, and then kids, job, life got in the way, and then I haven't really thought about it too much. Then I got into writing. I always wanted to write. It's just my girlfriend and now wife got pregnant, and I kind of I had to get a real job, and so I was always interested in policing to a certain extent because I was interested in why people did what they did. And so I thought that would be a good avenue to pursue because, trying to get a psychology degree or anything like that would be very costly. And I've never really ever had money. So I just got the job there. And then for like 10 years, I didn't do any writing or anything like that. And then I picked it up again and entered a contest. The first contest I entered, I'd won. And so then I thought, maybe I can do this. I just started. It's weird how I got onto Nietzsche from there. It's just because, like, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, me and my family went to Rome, and I'd never been anywhere in my life. Right? I'd been to Cuba for my honeymoon, and that was it. And when I went there, it kind of like blew my mind. Like everything, like the roads there, especially in Rome, they'd been built, around the time of Christ, right? Like there's still amazing roads, and it kind of blew my mind. So I went from there to ancient Roman history to then you get back into Plato and Seneca and then Zeno and all those philosophers, and then I stumbled upon Nietzsche, but I had stumbled upon him when I was a teenager, but then I just bumped into him again because he had a real passion for Greek and antiquity, like people of antiquity. So got into him then, stumbled upon your podcast, and that really, really helped my understanding level. Because a lot of times you work the stuff out on your own, and it might take a lot longer. And sometimes it's good to have a little step on someone's shoulder sometimes, and just get that understanding a little quicker, and you can continue to resolve and think about the issues on your own.
Would you say then that so like seeing, like I presume you saw like the Forum in ancient Rome and the like you were saying the roads, like the road leading like I forget what it's called, like the Appian Way and stuff like
Yeah.
that and the aqueducts and everything. That how did that like kindle an interest in philosophy? Was it just sort of like the realization of there you have this advanced like complex society so long ago, right? And they had a totally different worldview and thoughts of their own.
Yeah,
Was it
so
something like that?
it's a lot like that actually. So it's I said I'd never been anywhere, right? I'd always been interested in history, to a certain degree, right? Not to the degree like when I came back, like my family was like, "What's wrong with this guy?" Because I was just reading everything about Rome, and there's that podcast, um, History of Rome.
History of Rome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I probably listened to that series twice, right? And then you get Dan Carlin talking about the Caesar episode, the really long one, and then he had the
Yeah.
one about the fall of Rome, where he's talking about the Gracchi brothers and all that type of stuff. Like I was
Yeah.
just
And he has one on the it's called the Celtic Holocaust, is like Caesar's war in Gaul
that's like
as
that's
well.
That's so good, right? And then it's just that's I just kind of thought processes, right? So I'm like, okay, well, there was a bit of disconnect. So with where we are now and where we were then, right? And then I was kind of more like the buildings that they did then and that they're still standing. I was just kind of amazed, right? You just kind of you want to think about um, the people of the past like as less than. But when you go there and you see what they built, you realize that's completely not true. There's just
Right.
all it is just a difference in technology. And sometimes, and difference in the accumulation of knowledge, right? So
Right.
access to knowledge, whereas almost every one of us in the West here has access to the internet, and then therefore you have access to tons.
Probably more knowledge than you is good for you in some cases.
Absolutely right. There's some rabbit holes you kind of shouldn't go down, but
Yeah.
so you get sucked in very easily.
Yeah. I
So
think what it is, you realize that people from past eras are that there hasn't been that much change between us and them in terms of like what would you say the basic, you realize that it's not like our brains have grown like massively since the time of ancient Rome. It's like you said, it's just the accumulation of technology and knowledge. That if you were born into that same society and raised in it, you would blend right in. But then there's that other sort of recognition that, but wait, but they have a completely different worldview than ours. And so I
yes,
think that's what kind of fuels that tendency to be like, oh, well, they're just less than us. Or like
yes,
they they didn't understand the world as much as us, which I mean, I guess we both said they didn't in many ways. But in terms of what would you say? That's where I guess the sort of Nietzsche's insight comes in that it's only like a moral prejudice that the truth is worth more than mere appearances. That
yes,
to the world as it appeared to them, they like thrived in that world and they built all these like incredible things
yes.
from the
They seem
knowledge
to
and the
be. Sorry, go ahead.
no, you go on.
They seem to be have a healthier balance between the physical and the mental, right? So it's like they didn't try to weren't ashamed of their physicality or their their animal instincts, right? So it's kind of, they kind of incorporated them into their political beliefs and everything like that. And I thought um, I thought that was kind of a healthy way to be, like not to the extent that you're murdering your neighbors and everything like that, just more like in the sense that
Well, their spiritual beliefs, I think, are very interesting because they almost believe in like a afterworld or an other world where things are sort of material and embodied, rather than we've got this soul idea now and this idea of like an afterworld that's sort of like um, fundamentally beyond our understanding and sort of like disembodied and spiritual. Whereas it seems like even though they kind of develop these other beliefs, definitely by the time of the Romans of like afterworlds, it seems like it comes out of this idea of like that your actual body will like go on living underground. And then that just sort of like develops into like you'll go on living in some underworld. But it seems like they're very much like embodied sort of their spiritual world and didn't, there's that famous line of Achilles in Hades who says, I'd rather be like a humble farmer, cursed to work the earth in like at a lowly station, just so I could, breathe air again and
yes,
feel the warmth of the sun, right? It's like this celebration of life
hmm,
rather than, and I would do like life is good, right? Even to the person who's passed on, who's a great hero.
yeah,
Whereas like, yeah, our current ideas are sort of like that after you die, you're in paradise. So
yeah, or depending like
compared to that.
even the people that are less religious or even not even religious to any degree, they're more spiritual. They do think there's a soul that continues to go on, and it kind of like leaves your body and it just does what it does, right? And it's interesting because like you talked about it in your Festel de Collonges series, where it's like you were just mentioning where they buried them and they believed that the soul was stuck in that body, and they did libations for the their fallen their fallen family member who, becomes a deity at a certain point, right? And it's like I find that very interesting in the sense that even in death they didn't separate the body from the soul, right?
Mhm.
It was still there, it was with the body, and they fed it, and it's the whole materialistic thing, right? Whereas
Yeah, the dead is like they live in a certain place,
yes,
right? Yeah.
but you can access them, so it's like they're still material, right? Whereas
Even the impulse to say the gods live on Mount Olympus, you're like
yeah,
putting them in a specific place,
yes,
whereas
mhm,
versus God is everywhere,
mhm.
right?
But it's like it just seemed more. I don't know. It's certainly more interesting, and it's hard to say whether you could say it was healthier or not, because we never lived in those times. We have no idea whether or not, but it just seems the idea itself seems to be a better blending of the two problems that people seem to have with the body and the soul, right? I just found that it was more interesting in that regard. They fused them together, and they had them work together, and they weren't separated as so much as they are now.
Yeah. Okay. So you got interested to Nietzsche through your interest in like ancient
Mhm.
Rome, Roman history, Roman thought, and then the way Nietzsche talks about, I guess, the Greeks and the Romans as being more life affirming. So you said you wrote. I want to go back. You said you wrote something that won the first contest. You was it the first contest you'd submitted something to?
Yes, yes. It's so like I said, it's like you go you're in your job, and your job is paying for your family, and it's a good thing, right? And it's not a terrible job. They treat you pretty good, and it can be very interesting at some point. And sometimes, like more time you have on with anything, the less interesting it becomes because you get to understand most of the nuance and everything like that that goes on with it, right? I got bored at work because, like I said, you after a certain amount of time on any job, you understand a lot of the aspects of it, and there's nothing new. There's um, nothing that you can work with really. Like especially when you're in a bureaucracy, like there's a lot of policies and procedures that you have to follow. You can't really express yourself creatively in that way. And then I was like, well, why didn't I ever go back to writing? Is something I wanted to do when I was like remember like 12, 13 years old. I was really interested in it. And then I just didn't do it for a long time. I went back to that. Um, and then my in laws uh, put me on a course through like Humber College, just like an introduction to creative writing course. So I just did a semester of that. I'm like, okay. And then, I'd been reading my whole life, right? Like probably 3 to 4 books a week, like consistently. You kind of understand things out, how to write or what the structure is and how to pace. And you kind of, I've had a lot of years of reading that, and you understand what pacing means and everything like that. Maybe not at that point you're able to articulate it, but when you sit down to write, it just kind of works that way. So there's a couple of short story contests that were out there, and then there's one where if you won, you got actually paid some money, which is very unusual. Then also it would go into a print book at the end of the year for an anthology. And so the story I submitted took first place, and I got the money, and then ended up being in a book, a hardcover book for the year, because only one story would get in it every month. So there's like 12 short stories in this book, and mine was one of them. Okay, well maybe gave me a bit of a confidence boost, right? And then I just went on from there. Started writing a bunch more short stories and getting them published, and then working on books on the side.
And was this a horror story?
Oh,
I
that,
mean, I something you mentioned when we talked before, we recorded this is you said you don't really, if I recall correctly, you were saying that you didn't really attempt to set out to be a horror author.
yes,
It's just that your stories kind of turned out that way. Was that the case with this first short story?
absolutely. So I was like experimenting with different genres, right? And my wife was reading Confessions of a Shopaholic series. Do you remember those books at all, or you remember hear those?
I do not.
Okay,
I
so
don't
they
think
were
so.
they were they're a pretty popular book series, and they made a movie out of one of them. So she was reading
Mhm.
that, and I'm like, well, I was just trying to test myself. I was like, okay, what if I wrote a story? What type of story would you like to read? And she said something along those lines, and I wrote it, and it ended up being a horror story. Ended up being the character ended up being hung by his feet and then gutted by a coven. So it's like way off like what it should have been, right? Like it's called the dinner party, right? So it's like all these women and they invite their groups of men, and it's just going to be like I was trying to do like a dialogue piece, like just work on dialogue and make it bounce back and forth, like just trying to work on that. Uh,
Mhm.
I was going to make it, attempt to make it witty and fun for anyone to read. I think it ended up, being a blend of both. But then, yeah, someone gets horrifically mutilated at the end, and so it didn't. And almost all my stories kind of turned out that way. I can't seem to escape it. It's like it's interesting in the sense that it's only horror because I would say because mostly the violence level and
Okay.
because of my job. Because otherwise, the story itself you could consider it a thriller, a whodunit.
Okay.
All my stories have different aspects to them. Um, so it only like I can't not have that balance in it to my because I don't go. I believe, anyways. I'm not gratuitous and I don't go overboard. Just like in my job and in my life, I've seen death, I've seen violence, I've seen these things, and to write them any less than what I've seen them seems very disingenuous to me. So I can't not do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So how did your job affect your view, how would I put it? Your conception of things like justice or those sort of themes that you might expect to see in such a story. Did I mean, I'm sure that your work affected that, but
Well,
could you
absolutely,
maybe
but it's
speak to that?
it's interesting because like I try to think about that a lot because a lot of people do ask me that when they after they read my books and they're like you meet and greet and you talk to some people. And for me, it's like I've always had weird ideas. Like I wrote stories when I was a teenager, and they were very odd. Um, so I'd say like for character development and dialogue and stuff like that, policing really hasn't helped me that much. But some of the aspects, like I know how they investigate murders in Canada, right, or in Ontario. I know how they do that, so I don't have to look that up, right?
Right. Yeah, no, write what you know. I mean, that is real advice. I mean, people would say, or there, I could see the snarky response of like, well, how do you write a fantasy novel? And it's
Mm,
like, well, if you don't, all those characters in that novel, even if they're, you know, a centaur or something, are going to be based on what you know
absolutely,
in terms of, human motivation and things like of that nature.
absolutely.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's a great starting point. But so, do you have? I want to ask you, do you have like a sense of justice in your story? Or here's how I want to phrase it. Do you think your stories take place in a fundamentally like just or unjust universe? And what I mean by that is like, um, let's say something like Twilight Zone.
Mm,
They're sort of like, um, they're tragic, they're kind of horrific, but there's like usually some sort of like a morality to the way the main characters get tormented or taken down.
mm,
It's usually some flaw that they have,
mm.
and it's usually proportionate, right? There's kind of a sense of like fairness
Reading the scales.
that, and versus something like Cormac McCarthy,
Mm,
where even if there's like big moral themes involved in the characters,
yes.
like it's not, there doesn't seem to be like any kind of moral order to the universe as he presents it.
Oh, Blood Meridian.
I guess
Wow.
Blood Meridian. Yeah. Somebody actually just asked me to talk about Blood Meridian.
Oh,
Or I've had a couple people now, and I'm like, I don't know if I understand Blood Meridian enough to like like I don't feel confident to actually tell people like this is what Blood Meridian is about,
I know
and
exactly
because
what you mean.
it's so it's such a tough nut to crack. Like I know I love it, and I know it's like left a huge impact on me, but it's really hard for me to say what it means. I mean, I can just go off on the standard Nietzschean shit about
Yeah.
power and stuff like that, but it's like that's all kind of obvious almost. Like the
Yes.
deep
There's
I
more
don't
to
know.
it than
I'll
that.
stop rambling.
It's more to it than that because of the depth of the characters. It's like, obviously if you can fundamentally bring it down to that idea, then that which is interesting, obviously, but the also interesting is the characters themselves and how they operate in that world and how they, you know what I mean? It's just a, it's one of those books where it's like you think about it long after you've read it. Those are hard to find,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I was like I maybe I'll read it again and try and do an episode on it, but I really don't want to talk about something if I don't feel like I actually have a good grasp and, like can feel confident in my interpretation of it.
Well, when I
I'm
talk to
just,
people about it, I just say, just read it, and you can talk about it afterwards. But I don't even know how to exactly like you said. I don't even know how to start telling you what it's about. You know,
right.
it's just
Yeah.
it's amazing.
Yeah, so but yeah, then back to the question, do you think yeah, like do you put your stories within a moral universe or an amoral one?
So it's one of those things. I don't. It wouldn't be something that I do consciously. That's for sure. It's I kind of like let the story do itself. Like my stories, I don't outline them. I don't plan them. I don't do anything like that. It's just normally I have an idea in my head, like or I'll have a scene. Uh, I'll be on a walk, right? Walking my dog or whatever, and a scene will play out in my head. I'm like, huh. And then I'll think about it a little more, and I'll think about it a little more, and then when I sit down to write, I probably have like 5, 6 pages in my head ready to go. And then after that, the story kind of does its own thing. Um, but I would say it's interesting. um, so one of my books, the ending is ambiguous to some degree. So some people don't know what happened with whatever one of the characters, and other people do know what happened. Like you know what I mean? Like you can go either way. It's different. I got like depends on who reads it because like most of my books don't have a plan. I don't have a happy ending. If it works out that way, great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I think like 3 of my books, I got. If any criticism I got, it was because they weren't happy endings. I don't consciously think about it in that sense. I
Right.
sometimes I'm more.
But I mean, like even if it's not like a happy ending, like is there I guess I'm wondering like do you feel like people get their comeuppance or
Yes and no because
yes and no?
in one of my books, one of the jerks in it does really well in it. And
Hmm.
some people got really mad at me about that. In the
Right.
reviews, it's like, oh, well, I thought that was the best way to end it, right? Or the best thing that
Hmm.
happened to that character. I thought that was the best way
Right.
to do it, and I still stand by it. I love that I did that. Well, like I said, I don't even feel like I did that. It's just like when I write it, just that's kind of how it turns out.
How it plays out,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's like that's kind of fun. Like I like that. I like not knowing where it's going to go.
Right. Yeah, do you ever okay, so that's interesting. So you don't do an outline. I know like writers are kind of divided on how useful outlines are. Um I've found so I actually because I've written some things. Never have published anything. I mean like I self-published a philosophy book, but it's like I've written like fictional stories and then also autobiographical stuff. And whenever I've tried to kind of go off without an outline, I've done it as sort of an experiment and had almost novel length stuff that I'm like, I feel like is full of great ideas, but has no focus at all.
Yeah. So
Um,
everyone's different, and that's why you're saying people are divided on that, right? So Stephen King doesn't do any outline whatsoever. He just sits down and writes. Then you'll have like
mm,
Ayn Rand, right? When she wrote The Fountainhead and those books, she did is like she would have like the main character, like Howard, outlines of Howard Rourke, and it would go into who his parents were. Like she went into super detail for everyone and then
Right.
how the story played out, and that's how she wrote it. Like she almost wrote a book before she wrote the book
Right.
on the people.
That's kind of like Tolkien
Yeah,
as well.
yeah,
And what's interesting about both of the that's okay, so that's funny because what's interesting about both Tolkien and Rand is that they both their writings take place within like a moral universe.
yes,
Like probably the most extreme example is Tolkien because there's like a literal god that's guiding the course of events behind the scenes.
yes.
And he also wrote like the whole Silmarillion before Lord of the
Mm,
Rings, which was not published beforehand. Um, and Ayn Rand similarly, or Ayn Rand,
no, I don't.
obviously has her own moral philosophy. That's I've heard that she actually hated 1984.
Really?
Um, yeah, and not because she disagreed with like Orwell's, like I guess you could say the dystopia that he was trying to warn about.
Yes.
She didn't like that what she called the metaphysical power that Orwell gave to evil, as she saw it, insofar as Big Brother wins in the end.
Mm,
The main character is broken. He betrays his closest, his love interest,
yes.
and really does love Big Brother at the end of the story. So it actually, the evil state like takes over Winston's mind,
Yes.
and so apparently she just hated that because she felt that her, romanticism is one of those funny words, but her definition of romanticism was that your story should basically heroically embody a moral, even if it's like contrary to what the reality is,
Mhm.
because that's the way you're going to sort of like bring that into reality. So you shouldn't depict this amoral, unjust world. So it's funny that both of those authors like also really intensely planned out the whole backstory of their universe
Yeah,
because it seems like they're almost sort of like playing God with it, right? Where they're like,
absolutely. Because they
this is,
want it to go a certain way before they've written. It feels like they want it to go a certain way before they've written anything.
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
and it's what, like you said, it's like people just do things differently, and whatever works, right? Like I tried to outline like I think two of my books. I was like, okay, I'm gonna give it another try. Because it's sometimes it's good to have a focus, right? Sometimes it's good to know what you're gonna do, right? And but within
yeah,
30 pages, I was way off. Like I couldn't even follow my own outline. It wouldn't work.
yeah.
So it's just it doesn't work for me. I put on like my classical music, and then
Mm.
I just write, and then whatever happens happens. That's kind of how it works with me. Um,
Yeah. That's worked with me with like short stories,
mhm.
actually. I've got a couple that I'm kind of proud of that I just let them write themselves.
Yeah,
But anything novel length feels like uh, impossible for me. But like you said, it's just differences, I think, in
sure.
approach or thinking style.
Sure, and it's like so. And with novels, I find it works better. Like when you wrote your short stories, were you able to do it day to day, like day after day?
What's happened because I have so many, like, this is why I'll never be like a great writer, right, of fiction, because I have so many irons in the fire creatively that it's like the third or fourth thing for
Yeah,
me, right?
sure.
And so what I've had in my life is I've had bursts where I've written consistently, and then usually the fruit of that among, you know, a slew of either stories I've begun and didn't finish or actually completed, like a half dozen completed stories. I'll get like one that I'm like, this one's good. And that's happened every couple years for the past, decades or so. And maybe I'll have enough to collect them one day. Um,
Well, what
but yeah,
I was getting is that like for me, it's like when you wrote the short stories and you're able to do it consistently, and they went on their own. Um, that's how it kind of works with me. When I write books, and because I have a lot going on at home as well, I used to like a weekend where I could write a lot, and I wouldn't be able to touch it for 3 weeks. Then I go back to it, and
right.
I would have to reread what I wrote to figure out where I was. And then I'm like, oh, and then while I'm doing that, I'm editing. I'm like, oh, I got to stop doing this, and then I got to just just write, and then I kind of like it'd been good then to have an outline, to have a plan, just to know where I was and what I was doing. But when I can write every day, like when I make a point of getting up before everyone wakes up, getting 1,000 words done before I go to work, before I do anything else, um, I don't even have it. Just every day I sit down, I already know what I'm going to write because the night before, after I finished reading, after I finished writing those 1,000 words, the next 24 hours or 23 hours or whatever they are, thinking about what I'm going to do next. So when I sit down the next day, it all comes out like within an hour. So it's like
Right. So you're saying
consistency.
you get a better product overall when you're just writing like every single
Yeah,
day.
consistency is key. Like it's absolutely key. It's like I made a point of doing it this year, and within 2.5 months I finished a book, and then I want to say a month and a half later I finished a novella. Like I'm editing them both right now. So it's one of those things where it's like if this was my job, my full time job, I could probably punch out 3 books a year, um,
Right.
without the editing. Right, the editing has a hell of a lot more time. Like just being consistent
Yeah.
that way, I'd be able to do it no problem. Just like when you do that, this works for me because I'm able to just hop into the story without having to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, like I still write like every day, but it's just that what I'm writing is either philosophy or like notes or scripts for this show. So
Yeah.
it's like that like takes up so much of my time now that it's like and sometimes I write way more than 1,000 words. But that's, I don't know. I've got that just ability to focus in on something like obsessively and
Those are good things.
you know
Those are good traits.
yeah, I think so as
Yeah.
well. So in terms of justice or injustice in your stories, like what are some things specifically that you could maybe say, themes that have arisen from like your experiences in the investigating homicide or
Oh.
working in homicide?
So for the homicides I worked on, person had like mental health issues and wrongfully thought in their psychosis thought that someone else was a pedophile, and they stomped them, right? And so it's a totally different thing. The only thing I would say, considering that and with the themes that I write about, so like one of my books, Murder Run, I was really interested in. A lot of times I deal with people, and they do terrible things, but they're not terrible people, right? It's kind of you got to separate those. In my opinion, anyways, you got to separate those two things. The same guy that broke into someone's car and stole all their stuff because they needed to get their drugs, see them at the mall later that day, opening the door for an older lady, being kind, right? Like no one's mean or evil all the time. It just isn't a thing, from my experience, from what I've seen. So, like in my Murder Run book, I was more interested in a guy who just does impulsive things, and then in order to live with himself afterwards, rationalize it as someone else's problem or was their fault that it happened or something like that. And the events that he gets involved in from that mindset are present throughout the book. And it's kind of I liked exploring that. It's just like a person who, like I said, he doesn't think he's evil. He doesn't think he's a bad, necessarily a terrible person. Um, he does some evil things in the moment, and afterwards, in order to rationalize those things, to reconcile the evil that he does and the good person that he thinks that he is, has to place the blame elsewhere, which is outside of him. And I kind of explore stuff like that, but like guess that could be related to my job because like, the people
Yeah.
I deal with, like I said, like no, I haven't run into an evil person, right? I haven't run into someone
Right.
who's like, know, um, done some bad things, absolutely, and they know they've done some bad things, and
Hmm.
but like I said, they'd do some kind things as well for people around them and other people. So it's one of those things to reconcile. Like
What about like justice versus revenge?
oh, so justice versus revenge. I think uh, our whole system is about revenge. The
The whole
yes,
system.
only in the sense that it's interesting because like Nietzsche says that thing right where it's if the punishment doesn't benefit the criminal, then it's not justice; it's revenge. So
Right.
when I look at that and I look at our whole system, so in policing, especially from our standpoint, like typically I only deal with 5% of the population, right? You run into the other people every now and then, but those are the people that car was broken into, and you probably won't hear from them again, right? Or their house was broken into, and you won't hear from them again. The occasional person who drives drunk, like they're not typically always in the system. But
Right.
there are a group that 5% of the population. I know I know them personally. I see them on the street, and I'm like, hey man, how's it going? And they'll swear at me and jokingly because I have a pretty good relationship from most people. Like we'll just hug each other on the street, but it's like I deal with them all the time. So if I'm dealing with them all the time, the purpose of our system benefiting them, I would
Mm.
disagree.
Yeah.
Right? I
No.
would disagree 100%. Every time that I
Right. It would seem it's just like repeating the same
yeah,
thing over and over
but
again.
there's nothing being done to benefit that person. Nothing being done to help them with their behavior. Nothing being done except to get them out of the public's eyesight for a bit, so it looks, so the appearance is that the justice system is doing their job. Then they're back out again, right? And then they're doing the exact same thing, but nothing was done in the meantime to help them out. That being said, there are resources for these people, and are available for them, and but they haven't been taught to use them. There hasn't. There's nothing. You know what I
Mm.
mean? It's like when
Yeah. Foucault talked about that as well. Um, Basically about how the whole the punishment of criminals used to be like a very public thing in European society. Like publicly shaming people, publicly flogging or executing people, where it's made into like a spectacle. Whereas there was a shift that happened where it's become like hidden from the public eye,
yes,
um, and where the cruelty we would all like kind of regard like a public execution as being more cruel or inhumane. But I think he like to me compellingly raises the issue. It's like might actually be more of a problem because it's still the same the same behavior, but it's just sort of like out of the public sight.
yes.
What are some of your favorite revenge stories?
Oh, almost every Quentin Tarantino movie has a revenge thing in it, and I love his movies.
Yeah,
I think his movies.
Kill Bill is like the magnum opus
Yeah.
there.
But like even like Django Unchained, they all have these like
Yeah.
revenge motifs in them, right? And um, I really do enjoy his films. I think they're outstanding. Like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I haven't really thought.
Which Tarantino film would you place at the as your
My
favorite?
favorite is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Oh wow. That's a controversial choice, my
No,
friend.
I absolutely love it though. Like in what like Pulp.
I loved it as well. I saw it in the theater and I thought it was great.
Yeah, so like that's interesting, right? So it's like Pulp Fiction is obviously has a place in the heart, and those Reservoir Dogs,
Mhm.
and they're all great, really. But like the thing that I really enjoyed about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that there was no, in my opinion, anyways, obviously, there's no superfluous um, images, dialogue, or anything. Like everything in that film to me was engaging
Yeah.
and was necessary for the overall context content of the film. I thought, like,
And you feel like it's like over before you know it
yeah,
too.
it,
You're so engaged at every
you're
point.
so pulled in. Like, there's not one scene in that film that wasn't interesting. Like the camera work, whatever you want to call it, the people, the way they're acting, the dialogue. There's nothing that was uninteresting in that film. If the
Yeah.
entire time forgot I had a phone, that's a great film.
Mm. Yeah. 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 With Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's not like a flaw, but it's just a thought that I've had. Um, and I guess spoilers. So skip to 10, 15 seconds after that. I don't know. Skip ahead if you don't want to hear this. But I felt like, so I know the details of like what happened with the Manson family and the Manson murders, and it kind of occurs to me that like I don't know if everybody would, and so it's like it almost gives something away to like tell someone you should look up what happened with
Oh,
Charles
yeah.
Manson and those murders before seeing the film. But I feel like it was the fact that I knew the actual history, right? It's sort of like with Inglorious
Yes.
Bastards, right? Like the where they kick down the door and then they just machine gun Hitler
Yeah.
to death. And then you realize you're like, oh, Tarantino. I don't think I ever thought before that point. I'm like, oh, Tarantino doesn't have to play by the rules of what's actually in the
Oh,
history book because it's a movie. I never had that
yeah.
thought because they always have to in films, make it, like Captain America was doing all this great stuff during World War II, but the public never found out
Yeah.
about it, right? No, they can just kill Hitler, and so that's a similar thing with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's just like a more I'm not going to call it obscure. I just wonder, like, in decades to come, will people be as familiar with that? Because if you know what actually happened when the other shoe drops, that's such a. I mean, people were laughing out loud in the
Yeah.
theater at the most gratuitous
Yeah.
violence, and it was absolute, just uproarious laughter from the audience, and that only happens in Tarantino movies. I
Sure.
feel like.
So, yeah, I agree.
That's one thing I like about it, but also I'm like, because I've had a couple friends see it who were like they didn't get it.
Yes.
I don't know. I guess it's like it's only for the if you get it, you get
Well,
it.
it's also like, so question is does it have impact if you don't know that story?
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you had no idea
Right.
about that, what actually happened, would it have any impact on
And also, I guess the whole romanticism for old
it? Yeah.
Hollywood, right? Um, of like seeing it as like it's like instead of that being the death of the old Hollywood, it gets to like live on. It's like it's a fairy tale,
Absolutely.
right? But you have to kind of know. I mean, I guess you can kind of if you don't know anything about the old studio system or anything, and you haven't seen any 60s movies or 70s movies, you might not get some of it, but it does a pretty good job, I guess, of kind of conveying, what the situation is in Hollywood. But I think for me, especially because I love a lot of cinema from that time, like it is a special movie.
I like that's why it is my favorite one. Because, like I said, there's nothing uninteresting in that film to me. Like, not was never there's no point in that film where I was like, oh, what time is it, or nothing. Never. Right?
Right.
And I don't know. I think all of his films were like that with me, but this one was to a more powerful degree that there's no way I was taking my eyes off that screen. I was not doing it.
Yeah. I saw Glorious Bastards in the theater in Austria.
Oh, did
So
you?
that was kind of wild.
That is wild.
But I think one of my favorite revenge stories is Count of Monte Cristo,
God.
which is like in the literary or the cinematic adaptation. The one with Jim Caviezel is good as well. But that's kind of it's referenced in Django Unchained, I guess.
Yeah, with the names.
Who's the author? Alexandre Dumas. Yeah, who wrote Three Musketeers as well. But I can't help but think that that was like kind of a nod to like that's like the author of one of the greatest revenge stories of all time.
I think so. Like that's certainly something Quentin is really enamored with, is the revenge tale. Like, really, they are the most interesting sometimes.
Yeah, what is it about it? I mean, it's like so satisfying when a character takes
It's
revenge.
just really has something.
Um,
I don't know for sure, but it has something to do with like uh, that's how you think the world should be, and it so often isn't. So when it plays out that way for you in a fictional way, it's deeply satisfying.
yeah, but it's like you always have this. There's a lot of stories where you have to like talk about the hollowness of revenge
Mhm.
also, and how many lectures have there been from characters saying like killing them won't bring your loved one
Yes.
back, right? Is always sort of the line.
Yeah, and, like it depends on
Um,
where you are,
so it makes
whether or not you buy into that, right?
right. I guess I'm just wondering because it's like almost like people have like a moral. We all have like a sort of moral objection to
Mhm.
revenge, but at the same time, we know we're satisfied by it when it plays out in literature.
Absolutely, and yeah, for sure. And literature and film, even sometimes if it seems to work that way in real life, right? People are all over it. Like,
Hmm. Oh yeah, I see vindictive behavior
mm,
all the time, like on
mm,
Reddit or just like online
yeah.
generally.
But I
Uh,
guess it depends
a
on the
lot of social media is just
yes.
raging id. Sorry, go on.
I guess it's one of those things where it's like as long as like it's a quality to the revenge that whether or not it's okay to endorse it or not. You know what I mean? Like petty, cheap revenge is really frowned upon. If it's presented in if the revenge is presented in a way where that person deserved to have that satisfaction, you can get behind.
Yeah, the scales are being like
Yeah, even
equalized.
if it's in
Hmm.
more.
Even petty stuff, I think, is because there's that the whole thing of malicious
Hmm,
compliance. Like, have you heard of
I
this?
don't know what it's
It-
about, but I've heard off like something about
yeah, it's basically like I think there's a subreddit, but that it's like if you're somebody working in customer service and a customer is asking you for something that they don't want,
it.
right? You maliciously comply with their what they're telling you because they're being annoying, right? And so that people really enjoy that, where it's like this person's getting their comeuppance because they're behaving inappropriately to like somebody who's there to help them, right, or something like that.
That is very interesting.
But yeah, like one of them I remember was like it was like a clerk at McDonald's who they basically posted that like a customer came in, he ordered he placed his order and there were other people ahead of him and another order came out and he ran over and was like, this is the wrong food, this isn't mine, and can you please get me the right things? And so they maliciously complied by grabbing all the food that they had just prepared for his order, putting it in the bag, and then giving it to the customer whose order it actually was. And then they said, sorry sir, we messed up on yours, we'll make we'll make another one for you, just to like piss him off. And people like,
Enjoy that.
yeah, cheering for it, upvoting it because it's like the Karen. Nobody likes
Yeah,
Karens, right? So you take petty revenge against Karen. I think that's something like that.
yeah, for sure.
But I don't know. That whole phenomenon is just like interesting to me. That it's like people can be very open about vindictiveness just being like fulfilling,
Sure,
and yet everyone would say that's unhealthy,
absolutely. And it's like they
pretty
seek.
much.
It's weird because they seek social acceptance for it. Like if they're posting it on the social webs, right? They're like doing that for for acceptance for what they did,
An
right?
audience,
It's like,
yeah.
hey, look what I did. This is a good thing. You should cheer, right? And it's an interesting thing. Whereas like if someone were to do that to them, they're like, I didn't like that at all. Like that, I didn't think I deserved that.
Yeah, they'd probably consider it a violation of their
Yeah,
privacy, as
yeah.
most people would, to like be talked about publicly in front
Mm.
of everybody. Yeah, it's it's a very odd motivation, but what do you think? Maybe we can pivot to get a little more
Sure.
philosophical about sort of Nietzsche's ideas. Have Nietzsche's ideas found their way into your storytelling? Maybe I should ask that first.
It's only in the sense that I'm trying to peel back the layers to some of my characters, get a deeper understanding of them. That way, I could represent them better on the page. And it's like because like Nietzsche has that thing where it's like The strength of a person's character could be measured how much truth it can endure. So it's like I kind of
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes that's applicable to self awareness, right? Like looking at yourself and seeing and
Yeah.
absolutely seeing all the negatives that you have, and without shying away from them or without trying to hold a shield up against them or rationalizing them away, just going, these are things that are not good about you, and either work on them or don't, or if you can do so, right? That type of thing. So like I look at it from my characters, like obviously some won't do that. They won't look at that. They'll rationalize all their bad behavior. They'll blame other people, and other people will take ownership um, of their actions and try to make some resolutions within the people that they care about. It's like that kind of helps. Thinking about what the whole truth thing with Nietzsche really helps me in character development. Um, also,
Mm.
like we were talking about um, justice thing. Like even though I don't consciously have a moral a moral goal to my stories or anything like that, or a moral happy ending that I'm looking for. I do think like the way EJ says is try to look at reality for what it is, not what you want it to be, right? Or not what makes it
Mhm.
better for you to look at. So like I tend to focus on that when I'm writing, in the sense that because I want it to be real, right? I want it to be like wrapped in saran wrap so you can't see through it. I just want it to be as real as possible.
Why where do you think that comes from, or why what's the appeal to you of making it as real as possible? Because then there's the other philosophy of like, well, reading is an escape,
Yes.
right? Where it seems like how do you like balance that? Or I guess maybe this is the way I'll ask it. Like, is there to some extent that you do make it an escape? I mean, it is an escape because you're looking into, I guess, things that aren't most people don't normally
Mm.
encounter. Um,
But it's definitely
or maybe they
well,
do. I don't know.
it's definitely an escape because it's not. It's hard to say. Like some people say, you don't learn much from fiction, but I tend to disagree. Um, you can learn from fiction, but I'm not trying to teach anything really. Just it's definitely an escape. I wouldn't say it's an escape um, to a comfort zone, right? I kind of want you to be uncomfortable. I kind of want you to, think about what's going on and think about where it can go, and then not knowing where I'm going to take you because it's kind of like I don't want you to know. I want you to walk around that corner blind in the book, right? I want you to, but also because that's the tricky part with fiction or any type of whodunits or anything like that, right? You want to leave almost invisible breadcrumbs. Like your subconscious mind picks up these breadcrumbs as you're being led along.
Yeah.
But when you get to that ending or you get to that revelation, you as the reader don't feel cheated. You're not like the
Right.
hell I
It's not like it was my
yeah,
twin
like it,
brother
it has to be
or
there
something.
has to be a foundation on which the conclusions are drawn from, right? So it's like uh, as long as I can do that well enough where the reader is kind of blind to them, but also pick them up subconsciously, they don't feel cheated at the end, then I'm very happy with it.
Yeah, I've heard the rule like the audience should basically be like 3 seconds behind the narrator or
Yeah,
the story in knowing when the like climax of the
yeah,
denouement is going to come. Like that's like the perfect you want them to like be just behind putting together so they're just shocked and then it makes perfect sense of
yes.
everything after that point. Do you hmm, do you have a favorite who done it story?
Like one that I wrote, or just in general. In
Oh, or just
general.
in general?
Um, no, I know it's not really like it's just not really as contemporary. Or I do like the old Sherlock Holmes stories, right? By Arthur
Oh,
Conan
okay. Yeah,
Doyle.
yeah.
It doesn't work that way, obviously. Like that type of logic doesn't work in solving murders or anything like that. Like not to the degree that it does for
Right.
him, anyways. Um, I do do like it. I thought it's kind of that's my escape. It's like kind of very it's kind of silly, but also there's things in there that are interesting as well, like the body language reading and all that type of stuff. It's I find it
Yeah.
very compelling, and it kind of some of it is actually accurate, right? When you're dealing with people, so kind of like that stuff. Like my job, it's hard for me to read other detective books or watch detective shows or like and if I watch CSI, like it's like oh my god, like none of it's accurate, right? None of it.
Well, it's also that it's so predictable
Yes,
as well.
yes,
Um, that it's like it's so funny that the audience knows exactly what's going to happen in every episode, and they're the most popular long-running shows in like American
absolutely.
history. Are these like weekly
Right?
detective stories? I mean, a lot of really famous characters though that have kind of like transcended that. They basically started as detective stories, like
Yes.
James Bond. Those are basically
Yep.
just detective stories in
Hmm.
Fleming's early novels. Batman is like a detective
Sure.
type character in the
Yeah.
early comics. They've gone, both of those characters have gone to like a scale that is probably would have horrified the people who wrote those stories when they
Yes.
initially did. But it's like it's interesting that I don't know, there's something about the detective archetype that like just eternally charms the audience, or they just love to. I think about David Lynch actually talking
Mhm.
about it with Twin Peaks, that there is like a very like, I don't know, maybe like almost like a Jungian archetype of the detective as this like detective, this person shining a light
Mhm.
into the unknown, and that we all kind of like enjoy that,
Sure.
and enjoy like
Well,
going
and you're
along
being
for that.
exposed to a world that you've never not normally experienced, like you don't experience yourself, right? Like normally people get up, they go to their work, they go to their job, they do the 9 to 5 thing, get their drink at Starbucks, right? Not they don't get to see what happens at murder scenes or great robberies or anything like that. So it's just kind of an interesting thing, right? So
Yeah.
it's fun, right? It's what it is. It kind of like because I know how it actually works. It really bothers me. Like you know when you watch shows, the cop is like walking around and he has his finger on the trigger while he's walking around with the gun. Never
Right.
ever do that. Like it's if I did that on my when I was in training, like because we have to qualify all the time on our firearms, so we have to go shoot it and get scored and qualify on it. So it's like if I did that on the line at any point, they take my gun and send me home, like, and they would like it's just not you're
Right.
not allowed to ever do that, right? Like it's if the only time they want you to put your finger on the trigger is when you know that it's gonna like something that you have to. Yeah, like
You're
you're
about to
gonna shoot. Like
discharge
you
your
have
weapon.
no choice. You're gonna shoot. Right? So other than that, if you have your gun out, your index finger should be along the side of it.
Right.
When I see them in cop movies, like with their, I can't stand it. It drives me nuts, right? It's because I'm like, that's a simple thing that you could learn about. Like it's not just ask, hey, how do cops carry their gun when they do clear a house or do whatever? Okay, and then don't do that, right?
Well, and they always it's always two hands on the
Yeah,
weapon,
it's
right?
always two hands as a weapon, and you know how they put it up beside their head and they point at the ceiling before they turn around a corner.
Yeah.
We never do that, right? Your barrel is pointed where your eyes are always. Your eyes and your barrel are connected.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you clear everything. It's never you don't poke your head around a corner with your gun up. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, pointing
never,
at the ceiling. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you never do that.
Well,
You're
and even a show that I love, the old X Files. Um,
yeah, great show.
there's so many scenes where Mulder's just walking into a,
Mhm.
you know, clearing a location where he's got like a flashlight in one hand and a gun in the other, and he's just kind of like has it at hip level,
Yeah,
like shooting from the hip in one hand.
yeah,
It's like
yeah.
it's crazy stuff. But that must, yeah, yeah, that's true. When I think about anything you know really well, it
Mhm.
bugs the crap out of you when you see the details are like misrepresented in
Yes,
popular culture, because it's just like how hard is it to check on how we do this, guys?
yes.
You
Like
know,
especially
like
that one. Like any cop will tell you how it's done. Okay, like this is it's not like one of our secrets that we have. Like not that we have secrets, almost all our bureaucracy
Right.
is online for everyone to read, right? So it's not like there are those. It's just it's such a simple
Maybe it is. Maybe it's like a conscious effort to keep criminals like pointing their guns at the ceiling before they enter a room.
thing.
So they think
Probably.
it's like
Yeah.
all a long con of like, oh, this is how you do it. Just
It's
to give us the advantage.
Yeah, so it's like those details like that only like they take you for me they take me out of the story, so I don't want to be interrupted from the narrative, right? I don't I my disbelief has been suspended. Don't take me out of that. So when I see a detail like that, it takes me right out of it, and it just like that's why it kind of bothers me, and it's hard for me to watch those shows.
So you really like realism in your storytelling and that you write and that what you look for in other stories. Is that fair to say? Like, is that high on your list of?
Oh yeah, I'd say it's fair. Like I'm into grittiness, I guess, right? Or to
Yeah.
I don't make a horrible scene nicer. You know, like where some people try to like lessen the impact. I don't go for that. I don't lessen the impact, right? Um, because like I said, I know what a murder scene looks like. I have an idea of what these people go through before they die. I kind of
Mm.
include that. Like I include that as best I can, is what I think, right? And for what I've seen in real life. But the interesting, like, but that being said, like some of my stories have, I guess you could call either not supernatural, either supernatural aspects or supernatural hints. You know what I mean? Where you don't
Right.
know if there's a supernatural reason for what's going on until the very end, and even then, it might not be that clear to
Right.
you, right? So
Those are some of my favorite stories,
yeah,
honestly.
so that's kind of like if you got Murder Run, which is like um, my newer ones. Like if you get to the end and I give enough invisible breadcrumbs. If you get to the end and you can predict that story, like good for you. It has like that's a good one. It's just because it has like very. I surprised myself is what I mean, right? Like when I got there, I'm like, what the hell? So, but it
When
works.
did
Sorry, go ahead.
Murder Run come out?
I think 2 years ago now.
Okay. And that's your most recent one?
Yeah, yeah, that's one.
Okay,
No,
cool,
no,
cool.
Olivia's my most recent one. That's the sequel to
Oh, okay.
Dollhouse that came out last year.
Okay.
Usually do a book a year,
Okay.
but
See, but you'd recommend like Murder Run for the people who like a story with a supernatural like breadcrumbs or overtone to it on the
sure.
edge of that where you don't quite know.
The only ones that don't have a supernatural aspect to them at all is Dollhouse and Olivia. So I have
Okay.
the Tracker, Off the Grid, and Murder Run have supernatural hints. It may have supernatural elements to it, but it's kind of subtle.
You have to decide
Yeah, it's
for
subtle
yourself.
the whole time.
Right. Um, there's one more thing I wanted to ask you about Nietzsche's philosophy in your writing, and I guess it has to do with how he sees like human motivation.
Mm,
That we're not like unified things. We have like these competing drives or impulses within ourselves.
yes.
Um, and that the self is kind of like a battleground. It's a multiplicity and a unity.
Mhm.
And I don't know. I guess I'm wondering, do you think when you approach a character, do you think about that aspect, or is that how you would see what's going on, quote unquote, inside a character? Or do you have a different, something different?
No, I find the so for characters for me, um, if you make them one dimensional, you're kind of cheating the audience, right? And the best way to not have it be one dimensional, your characters be one dimensional, is excuse me, is to like show the inner turmoils, the inner battles, and then even have their actions be contradictory to their dialogue. So you could see like what they actually mean, their actions, whereas their dialogue kind of misleads you. But it's like one of those things where it's like don't listen to what a person says, watch what they do. Kind of bring that out in the characters. Um, just to illustrate that point, because like internally we're all kind of battlegrounds, right? We're all competing drives, competing motivations, and some that we don't even notice or even acknowledge consciously. And I think the best way to bring that out in character development is through actions and dialogue, right? So I really
Right.
focus on that.
So yeah, where the action doesn't match the dialogue. That's interesting because that was going to be my follow up was like um kind of wondering about like how the best ways to like show rather than tell in
Yes,
that internal struggle because that is one of the more like annoying things I think when it's like constant inner monologue.
sure. So,
It's like so much better when it's like shown.
hmm. So like a good way, yeah. So that's a good one. So Stephen King really does this well. Like I like his earlier work a lot. Um, Later stuff, not as much. Not to say that he's still not an amazing writer. It just like I prefer his earlier work. So in Pet Cemetery, like, within the very first 10 pages, he does a really brilliant thing there. So the family's moving to the new house. They're all in the car, and wife's complaining about something. The daughter's screaming in the back, and Lewis, the husband, he's like, okay, well, he has a fantasy about dropping his family off at a corner and says, hey, I'll be back. I'm just going to go get the key for the house. Leaves them there and drives all the way to Florida and changes his name because he doesn't want to deal with that situation in front of him. But
Right.
but at the same time, within the same page or the next page over, they see the new house, and his daughter goes, "Daddy, is that the new house?" And he's like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Oh, that's amazing, Daddy! I love it." And then within the next sentence, it's something along the lines of, "And he never thought of traveling to Florida again." Right? So you see, he's a good dad, but he has struggles with like what we all struggle with. When you're overwhelmed with something, you kind of want to run from it. You don't want to deal with it. You just want to like it'd be much easier if I could start this all over again, right? So you get that
Yeah.
sense of the character like that within the first pages, which I thought was brilliantly done.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, as somebody who has published a number of books and you've been relatively successful,
Mhm.
how would you, what advice would you give to people who have never gotten into the game of trying to publish fiction? And like, what are just in terms of like you mentioned the habit of writing like once a day
Mhm.
and obviously staying up on their own reading, but is there something that helped, I don't know, was there some other ingredient that you could recommend?
Hmm. Well, I could tell you how I got published, and then we can go about what I've learned from that. That'll be helpful.
Yeah, just like you're like, what would you recommend if you could go back? How about this, if you could go back to yourself
Mhm.
before you'd publish anything, what advice would you give yourself?
Okay, so I would have started probably 10 years earlier than I did.
Okay, yeah.
But that's neither here nor there because like at that point in my life, like I wrote when I wrote, so it doesn't really matter. Um,
Right.
but it's
Life is short though,
yeah, for sure.
you know.
Yeah. If I could have started earlier, it would have been awesome. But um, that like I said, it doesn't really matter. What happened is that once I got the confidence to uh, so my whole thing was like you could self-publish and that and it has been successful for some people like Blake Crouch. I think he self-published at the beginning and he does well, really well. You got Willow Rose who does self-publishing and she does really well. My whole issue for me self-publishing one was that uh, I'm single income. I was single income then, and yeah, single income. So it's like just my income paying for the family, and I have 4 kids, and they have sports, and they have all that type of stuff, right? So it just wasn't feasible for the money purposes to self-publish. Like it just to get the editing and then to have someone do the book and all that type of stuff, the cover and stuff like that.
You could certainly get someone on Fiverr to do that for you nowadays, but when I was starting, wasn't the thing. Um, so what I was doing is just, and also I wanted someone in the industry. I want someone in the industry to say, yeah, you can do this, right? So when you self-publish, you might have your friends or you might have some other people that are telling you, yeah, it's a great book. You should publish it. You should do this, and they might be right, and they might be wrong. But unless you have that friend that would read it and tell you this is trash, or you trust them to tell you that this is trash or this is good, then you don't really ever know. So that's why I
Right.
went through the contest route. So if I could get people that read horror and think that this guy is worth publishing, then I'm like, okay, that kind of gives me an indication of whether or not pursuing this would be viable in a publishing way, right? I was always going to write once I got sat down to writing again. If I never got published, I would still be writing. It's one of those
Right.
things that I feel like I need to do. But for the publishing avenue, I wanted someone in the industry to say, yep, you can do this. This is good. And so I got, like I said, I won that contest. And then I probably got about 9 other short stories published in different horror anthologies. And then I wrote the book, and there's ways to go about it, right? You can go, what I would say for people starting out in the publishing world, if you send your book out to a publisher to try to get published and they want money from you, run away, right? So a traditional publisher is looking at you as an investment, right? They're looking at you like if they're going to buy Tesla stock or whatever, right? They're like, okay, and the only thing they know about you is the work that you're giving to them. So if you give them something, if you look at their publishing website and you followed everything to a T, the way they want to submit it, the way they want to be contacted, all that type of stuff is perfect. If you do that perfectly that way, then you at least will have them read it and then decide whether or not they want to put their money into you. And when they put their money into you, that's a win-win, right? So what that means is that someone in the industry says, you have work, you've created something here that I'm willing to bet on, because that's what you are. You are a bet. They're
Right.
gonna print your book in paperback, right? And if it's good enough, they'll even print it in hardcover. And then they're gonna contact their friends, depending on the size of the publisher. They're gonna contact their friends at the New York Times or the Washington Post, or say, hey, take a look at this book, because you'll be first in line for those reviews, right? And
Yeah.
all in the hopes of an unknown, right? So it's hard for a lot of people to understand that aspect, right? It's that, well,
Right. And
why
put
aren't I?
yourself in the line.
Yeah, like this person is they're putting, like if your friend came up to you and said, hey, I want to publish this book, will you give me $10,000? Are you going to do that? It's even though it's your friend, right? It's your friend, and you're not going to do that. Now, these publishers you're a stranger to them. All they know about you is what you're giving them, and
Right.
that's it. That's all they know about you. So you
Would you
gotta.
would you say to would you say to seek out a literary agent or just go straight to the publisher?
So
With
I'm in the
horror?
process now not getting, but I'm going to be looking for an agent. Once I get this newest book of mine published, I'll probably go with an agent. I went straight to the publisher, my route, which is fine. It worked out for me. My publisher, really small publisher out of Texas, actually, and but they've been great. They've been great to me, and I have no complaints. But yeah, so I'm gonna go for an agent, but I don't know. Either way is pretty good. The thing about an agent is also they're looking at you as an investment, right? It's kind of the same thing as a publisher. It's just an agent, depending on who they are, will have contacts in the publishing industry, so that door at the publisher's house they'll open a little bit more for you than you could on your own,
Right.
and they could get a deal for you better than you could, because they know the industry, and then looking at your work, they know the value of your work, and what publishing house it would fit. They just have a better idea of how to sell your product, right?
Yeah.
And also they also have connections on like, you know, they could have someone write up a screenplay draft of your book and then try to push it around to that avenue, like other, you know, smaller movie houses or anything like that. Go ahead.
Would you welcome one of your stories being
A movie?
adapted to the screen, or would you be?
Uh,
You'd welcome it?
I'd be. It's a different thing, right? So it's like I'd be kind of pumped that someone, once again, would be willing to invest their time and money in something that I wrote. Like, I think that's a huge huge honor, right? Like, that someone's gonna, like I said, like, throw money at you because they believe in what you did. So I think that's really cool. Also, my oldest son is graduated from Toronto Film School, and he's working
Oh,
at a
cool.
production company downtown Toronto. So he's working at one of the production companies there. And I told him if one of my books ever got adapted, part of my one of my requirements would be to have him work on the film.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah.
Nice.
So if
Yeah.
that ever happens, that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, John, thanks for coming on. Did you have anything your other I mean, I guess you have the new book. Do you have anything else you want to plug or anything you're working on? Anything you want to shout out at the end?
Sure. I just started out uh, my YouTube channel, so it's just me doing YouTube shorts because apparently that's what the algorithm favors, from what I understand. And also, it's really, you know, really what I only got time for. Like, I usually do my shorts while I'm walking my dog in the morning, and then I'll figure it out and upload it. So my YouTube is like John Hunt Fiction. Also on Twitter, John Hunt Fiction, and Instagram, all John Hunt Fiction. And if you're interested in my books, you could just go on Amazon.com or Amazon.ca and type in John Hunt Books, and they'll all pop up there. And
I'll put it in the description too. I'll link to you. You want me to link to Murder Run or Olivia?
I have, like, you know, they have an author page. So
Okay. Yeah, I'll link to your
like,
author page.
yeah, so then they can see all my books and then decide which ones they want. If they decide to
and then
do
your
that, right?
YouTube as well.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, I did some shorts when I was on tour recently.
I know, I saw those.
I didn't do as many as I. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I didn't do as many as I like planned to, but it was also that I realized like how because I don't normally like it's normally just audio only. But especially on tour, it's like, oh, I'll do a short this morning, and a lot of the time it's like I look like death warmed over, because I was just out until 4 a.m.
Yeah.
I haven't taken a shower
Yeah.
or anything, and it's like the amount of time where you actually like look presentable to the world is basically like
I know.
like you it's actually rather minimal.
Mhm.
It's basically like right before you go on stage, and
Yeah.
then even right after you're on stage, it's like covered in sweat and everything. So it was funny. I was like, a lot of the time I just don't want to be on camera right now. But
That's what
I
I'm
still
like.
put it. Yeah, I put out a couple that were good. That got a good response. So that's good.
No,
Yeah, you're the same way.
yeah, and they're kind of fun, right? So it's uh, like I said, like normally I'm in the same boat as you. Like, usually it's Canada, like it's May right now, so it's really dreary. So the lighting's not the best. And then
Oh,
also,
well,
like,
that's kind of cool though. Like for the vibe. I like the vibe of like dreariness sometimes.
yeah, for
But
sure. Yeah.
natural light does make you look better.
Yes.
Like,
It
yeah,
definitely helps. And then, like, I
yeah.
usually, it's because I walk my dog in the morning, so it's like after a night shift. So I've been up for like 16 hours, and then I'll go walk the dog for an hour. So it's like I'm not feeling or the peppiest at the time, but I know it doesn't come across my videos that way, which is good. But it's like the same thing. I feel like death warmed over as well. So it's interesting.
Yeah. It's also
But
really hard for me to condense anything into 60 seconds, but I
I
think
know
it's like a good skill.
it
Like I
is.
think it's actually valuable. I'm like I need to think about this more on the podcast. But
Well, it's
this
like
whole form
Nietzsche and his brevity, right?
yeah, it's true. On the other hand, the whole format is kind of like
It's kind of
anti-algorithm
a
where
good
it's just
skill to
like
develop for sure, because he was he was awesome at it.
Yeah. Maxims and arrows, dynamite phrases. Well,
Yeah.
John, it's been awesome. So, yeah, everyone will go follow you on YouTube, hopefully, and check out your works. Thank you so much
Yeah, I
for taking the
appreciate it.
time to chat with me and for
Hey,
reaching out.
it was great. It was
It's
like
been good.
I'm very happy that because like I said, I've been following your show like very early on, season one, and it's just like
Oh, cool.
it's been very good. It's been I'm very happy that you wanted to talk to me. Actually, it's very flattering. I'm very happy about that.
Oh, well, thanks. No, I love talking to guests like you, where you have some kind of I'm more interested in like people like talking to other people who are into Nietzsche but have like done something in their lives that it is like kind of different, or um you know, I don't know, where they're living out the life philosophy of Nietzsche, which is what I'm kind of doing as well, where like going and being in a touring band is like on the underground level doesn't make any sense
Yeah.
financially or socially or in many respects, right? But
Yeah.
it's sort of like my own, it's like this addiction to the Dionysian that I have, and my own like sort of like foolish artistic quest that I'm going to spend my life on. And
Well, absolutely.
like
Just
knowing how Nietzsche's informed that, and then I've seen, now that I understand that, I see it in other people too, right? Where it's like and so that's more interesting to me. I of course love talking to professors and stuff, and I'm trying to sync an interview right now with a professor that I think will be very a popular. I don't want to say anything more about it. Actually, I might even clip that out. But I loved, as much as I love talking to professors and academics. It's cooler to me to just talk to people who are like living their lives, if that makes sense, like that. So I don't know. Yeah. So of course, like when I saw, I was like, oh, horror author, let's go down that path, right? Like that's it. That's what's interesting to me. So
I
yeah.
appreciate it. It's like it's just one of those things, right? Because it's like I'm not like a known name really, but it's like when you look at it, like I have a small publisher who has like limited marketing like resources, right? Like he does the best that he can, they do the best that they can, but it's limited, right? But it's like it's amazing. Like I'm very like flattered and grateful when I look at my books, and it's like not one of them has an under 4-star rating, and I'm creeping up onto like well over 6,000 reviews total for all my books. It's like it's kind of cool, right? Like when you see that, and you're like, okay, like even like I said before, even if I didn't get published, I would continue to write because it's just a lot of fun, right? Like when I get into that
it's the same with the podcast too.
Yeah.
Of like when I see like how many people this is actually like touching, and how it's like, and it's like in the world of podcasts, like we're not, there's like that 0.1% that are like the top of the top. Yeah. But it's like I would be happy with this, like just the way it is.
Well, yeah, you're definitely growing. Like I noticed, like because I've also been subscribed to your YouTube channel for a while. Like your subs are getting up there pretty good, right? So, like it's
it's like 30,000 Spotify followers, and we're about to break 10 on YouTube.
Like that's great, right? Like think about where you started. Like what you're doing is very what you're doing is very valuable. Like to me, like that's what I mean. Like when I found your podcast, like and then I'm walking, like because I walk.
Do you remember what the first episode, or like when the first episode you listened to?
I know
around what time?
So it would have been around season 1. So what's that, like 3 years ago?
Yeah, season 1 was like more like 2. Okay. I know it's the time.
I remember I found you in November of season 1, like when you're doing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So in November of season 1, let's see, at the beginning of that month, I was averaging about 5,000 plays a week of the podcast.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was That's tiny.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
That's still great, it's cool, man. Like seriously. Like it's like I said, it's like
I just decided to pull that up now because it's good to remind yourself of like where you were and where you're going. It's cool.
Yeah. No, it's really good. It's really good. It's because it's weird. Like I don't know. It's like it's hard to describe. So it's like I started off like with you early, like listening to you in your season one, and then like I know, like, I can tell because you're posting weekly and you feel a pressure to post weekly that you have a larger audience, right? So it's like I didn't even have to look at your analytics to understand that, because if you had a small audience, you wouldn't have felt such pressure to get it out every week. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
like
Well,
you have,
but I mean, even yeah, that's true. But it was like I committed to that from the beginning as well, though, where I was
yes.
like, that what kills a bunch of people start podcasts, but that I knew,
Mhm.
but they all fail due to inconsistency. Really, the same thing you're talking about with writing earlier.
Absolutely. Like you
Uh,
have to. So like me and my friend did a podcast that we did horror movie reviews, movies of the damned. But we were both cops and we both had different schedules. So the only reason we stopped is because we couldn't schedule time together.
right.
But
Yeah. Well.
we were doing it once a week though.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah. It's like that's the thing is like, yeah. I just seen because like when I started the Nietzsche podcast, I knew a couple other people. You like people reach out to you also.
Mhm.
It's a lot of the people who were on the early episodes, the first like kind of conversation episodes I had their own
Yeah.
podcasts.
Yeah.
And most of those aren't around anymore, I don't
Mhm.
think, or because that just happens just one day. It's just like one day you see there's like a gap of like a month and
Mhm.
then a couple more episodes and then they're done because
Yeah.
it's just like or you see some podcasts where they don't have any consistent schedule at all.
Yeah.
And I think it's not just the volume of what you post. It's like where people know like, oh, every week we're getting like a new episode,
Yeah.
which makes it sort of I don't know. I think so. Yeah, I did start to feel that pressure as there were a lot of people there, and I'm
Mhm.
like, I have to keep this momentum going.
Yes.
And so yeah, I don't know, but I guess yeah. To wrap it up, consistency is key in
Always.
anything you want to do.
Always. It's also
Music,
you're
writing.
conditioning your audience to pay attention every week. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? So
that's
it's like
true. I guess I
uh,
intuitively understand that. I hadn't thought about it, but yeah.
no, it's like yeah, it's that's kind of the way I thought of it. It's like okay, and I thought of it only because that's what I was looking forward to, right? I'm like, okay, so usually posts either Monday night or it comes out Tuesday morning, and it will automatically download to mine. So yeah, I'm on nights that day, and I'll be able to listen to it on nights. Like you've conditioned me to be anticipating your next show, so it's kind of good, right? Like it's if you're doing that with enough people, then you have a stable audience.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been cool too because it's almost all word of mouth or just people sharing it.
Oh, absolutely.
Because that's what you need. Yeah, and that's another thing I would tell to people again. That's part of having that consistency again with what
Hmm.
you were saying earlier with like you would be writing even if you never got published.
Hmm.
Um, this you have to enjoy what you're doing to where you would be doing it anyway, and then you'll be able to like crank it out once a week or do a book a year or
Sure.
make an album every year or something like that. That's where you get that consistency. So you got to find that thing that you would do anyway.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy thing
No.
for everyone.
No, it certainly is.
Okay. Yeah. I think we've been going, yeah, we've been running for 2 hours.
Oh
So,
my gosh. Okay.
yeah, but I think we had a little bit of, we've got stuff that we'll clip out from,
Yeah.
we'll have to edit out. But anyway, we'll say our goodbyes. So, John, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
And we're signing off, everybody.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening. Take care.
All right. Cheers.